July has been a whirlwind on so many fronts, and I somehow read 7 books, which I honestly didn't expect. Hi, my name is Steph, and I love to read and talk about otherworldly books and theater and stories in all forms. I'm going to share all of my thoughts about my July reads, but first let me give you some other updates. If you've been following along with my shorts, or if you follow me on TikTok or Instagram, you may have seen my posts about the reading road to rings. Basically, I introduced my partner of 6 years, Kyle, to everyone, and then we talked about our future engagement, but there's a challenge involved. I'll just show you the video so we can all be on the same page. Kyle wants to propose to me, and I want Kyle to read my favorite books. This is Kyle, my partner. You may have seen his hands in videos before.
Hi, I'm Kyle, and I really love storytelling and consuming cool stories, and I do love reading. It's just that I have ADHD, and sitting down and finishing a book is not easy for me.
Here's our engagement compromise: the reading road to rings. Yes, graphic design is my passion. Thank you so much for noticing. I designed this kind of as a joke, and then I texted it to Kyle.
And I got excited, so I immediately spent $45 printing it.
So if Kyle wants to propose, he's got to get through these. But the timeline is up to him, so he can go as fast or as slow as he wants. Also, these aren't all of my favorite books. They're just books that I picked because he hasn't read them yet, and I genuinely think he'll like them, and I really want to talk about them together. We actually already have the same favorite book, which was mine first, but he stole it from me.
This Is How You Lose a Time War is an amazing book. I can't think about it without crying, and I read it in one sitting, so what's your excuse?
Every time Kyle finishes a book, he'll come on here and do a little book review for you all. So if you want to start peer pressuring him in the comments, maybe you'll get his review of Gideon faster.
My need to please is stronger than my ADHD symptoms, so.
Anyway, I'm so excited to share our journey. Kyle?
Which shelf is Gideon on? I'm starting now.
I give him annotating supplies, and he is in the zone. So yeah, that's the reading road to rings. And there's been a major update because Kyle, who really doesn't read a lot, flew through Gideon the Ninth in just 2 days. And trust me when I tell you, he had so many thoughts and feelings.
So I just got to the epilogue. I haven't read it yet. It's a really good book. Okay, that's all for now.
He loved it. It was 5 stars for him, and we chatted for 22 straight minutes about all of his thoughts and feelings and the vibes and who he'd recommend this book to and so much more. That full 22-minute video is available on my bindery if you're interested. And Kyle's next book will be Chain Gang All-Stars. I think that once he actually starts it, he's just gonna fly through that one, unless he gets distracted and reads Harrow first. But also we kind of have a special connection with Chain Gang All-Stars because the author Kwame Adjei-Brenyah is actually my mutual. And we saw him in person because he was in conversation with Akwaeke and Emezi for their launch of Little Rot. Did you know that the two of them have been friends for like many, many years? Anyway, I was like, okay, we're mutuals and I'm a big fan of his and I wouldn't expect him to recognize me or remember who I was. But he literally pointed at me across the room and said, I know you, and then came over and we had a little bit of a conversation and he signed and personalized my book. And Kyle witnessed all of it. It was really cool. So now we have signed copies of both of his books and I'm so excited for Kyle to start Chain Gang All-Stars. But I know you're probably tired of me yapping about other things, so let's talk about the books that I read in July. I started off my July very strong with Harrow the Ninth, and I finished reading Harrow right before Kyle started Gideon, so I was sort of giggling to myself and watching him theorize. If you know anything about this book, you know that it's very gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, and I like to keep these videos spoiler-free so that you can decide to pick up the book for yourself after. But it's very hard to talk about this book, I mean period, but spoiler-free, so this will be kind of brief. It did melt my whole brain. It makes you question yourself a lot, but I was right. I was right on almost all of it, so I should not have doubted myself. It's a really, really fun and slightly distressing ride that gives you a whole other sense of the world from the one that you got in Gideon. It does answer some questions, and of course it gives you a whole lot more to wonder about. I am really excited to move on to Nona, but Kyle wants me to wait for him to read Harrow and then we can like listen to Nona together, but I don't know if I have the patience for that. I just want to know. But moving on. In a world filled with mediocre Dragon Rider books, we need to shape a dragon's breath now more than ever. So it takes place in this alternate version of New England, and there's magic and there's dragons and all sorts of other stuff, but it is a super real story of colonization and racism and resistance. The main character, Aniku's, is such a badass. People are throwing things at her from every angle, and she is a young woman, but she never backs down, she never questions herself, and she never lessens herself. She doesn't try to make herself fit into the world of the colonizers. So basically she lives on this island with her people. They're an indigenous people, and the land has been colonized by these English conquerors, but they don't actually live on her island, they're on the mainland. And there's this indigenous breed of dragon that hasn't been seen on her island for decades, but one unexpectedly hatches, appears, and chooses her. And she then basically makes the choice to go and enroll in their boarding school. She wants the choice to come from her, so they don't show up and take away her dragon, because they have very firm rules on how dragons should be raised and controlled. And they're accusing her of all sorts of things, of like stealing this dragon and so on. This book is the first in the series, and it's got this really cool magic system that's sort of like chemistry-esque. It's filled with interesting side characters, and everyone had really fascinating journeys and backstories. The one thing I'll say is that it does sometimes get stuck in the details. Like sometimes we got paragraphs upon paragraphs of lectures like in school. And that was kind of cool, but it also challenged my attention span at times. So sorry if you can hear. My neighbors are doing construction. I would say I would wait, but they've been doing construction almost every day in the entire 4 years that I've lived here, so it is what it is. Anyway, this book was absolutely epic, such a cool read, and I can't believe it hasn't blown up more. I picked up Junker 7 thinking, oh, okay, this will probably be like a cute and cozy queer romance with sci-fi elements, and I was pretty wrong. I mean, it is a romance, it is sci-fi, but it's actually pretty close to our world, and there's rage and grief in spades. It is ultimately hopeful, but the vibes are rancid, just like the vibes of our current world are rancid. So our main character is Castor, and they're physically disabled from a spaceship accident, and they're also autistic. They work as a junker, which basically means they go around the galaxy and they pick up jobs from job boards, and they like scavenge things from old ships and shipwrecks, and then they sell that for money. And they also do some like lightly less legal things like smuggling things and going after people for bounties and so on. They have a super cute goldfish on their spaceship, which is a detail I loved so much. And they are super focused on staying out of trouble and minding their own business and just not getting involved. Except, dun dun dun, they're offered a job for so much money that they absolutely cannot refuse. And that job is to transport Juno Marcus across the galaxy. And Juno is a trans activist who's basically leading this revolution. She's super wanted. The job is going to be super dangerous. They have to go on this like 3-week-long journey to reach this other planet. Obviously, there's this immediate spark of love, but that's kind of paired alongside Castor having this big arc from someone who really doesn't want to be involved to someone who embraces revolutionary change. There's this big Trump-like character in this Fox News-esque sort of situation, and then also like an Amazon company that controls everyone's data, and the intergalactic police force are out to get people. It's rough out there. Castor also has a lot of sensory issues, and it's really interesting to see how that plays out in a futuristic environment and like on spaceships. Castor and Juno balance each other out really well, and they do fall in love quickly, but it's very sweet. I was into it. My biggest complaint about this one is that it just wasn't really creative. It was basically a copy and paste of our world, and I would have loved to see like more creativity and more thoughtfulness around how things would change in the future. I mean, I totally believe that rhetoric is cyclical and things come around again and again and again, but like, what would it mean for trans people to have access to higher tech so that they could alter their bodies? There's racism and xenophobia, but how would those shift if we're colonizing entire planets? What does it mean to be disabled in this world? It's actually not talked about that much. And also there are a lot of details that just aren't given to us. Like my brain kind of auto-filled everything about the Trump-esque character just because I made assumptions. But all of that aside, there was a hopeful tone. I really loved this eclectic cast of characters, and I know the author is working on a book too. And also just let me show off the beautiful edges on my edition, which is from Rainbow Crate. Joelle Wellington, who's the author of Their Vicious Games, just came out with her second book called The Blonde Dies First, and it was amazing. This is another story that gets a little meta, gets a little satirical, and has an excellent main character. It's a love letter to Brooklyn and also a love letter to classic horror and slasher films. So we're following this high school girl, Devin, and she has this plan to make the summer the best summer ever because her genius twin sister, Drew, is graduating a year early and going to college a year early, and she just feels like it's their last summer truly together. So Drew goes to a private school and she has all these other friends who Devin hasn't really met, so the first thing they do is Devin and her group of friends go along and meet Drew's friends and go to this big party. All is well and good until one of them pulls out a Ouija board. Things spiral pretty quickly and their friend group is haunted by a demon, except this demon is killing them or hunting them in slasher kill order. And that means Devin, who is the blonde of the group, is up first, and her crush, her secret crush that she's had for like a decade, Yaya, basically fits the framework of a final girl. And let me tell you, this friend group was absolutely beautifully written. Like, they all have their different stories and their different flaws, but they all just supported each other and they all just cared about each other, and it really clicked for me as a reader. Like, I would have read about this ensemble cast forever. At times this is a book about sisterhood, and Devin and Drew for sure have a lot to work on. Their relationship is pretty strained, it's pretty painful, but they do have a beautiful arc. And the horror, it is good, campy, fun, and they're also all hyper aware that they're like basically in a horror movie, so they're picking apart the genre and they're questioning it, and it's so meta, it's so good. And there is so much sapphic pining. You guys, you're not gonna know whether to squeal or to sob, or maybe you'll relate if you had a really bad high school crush, but it's so good. It's a bit funny, it's a bit scary, it challenges racism and classism in all new ways, and you will be rooting for everyone. Also, I went to an in-person author event for this, so I got to meet Joelle in person, and she's so cool. They also gave me a free gel manicure to match the cover, which was so fun. I haven't had my nails done since I was like a young teenager, so that was a really fun experience for me. Like, do I need to get into this? Do I need to start painting my nails again? If you've ever had the experience of sitting around the campfire and listening to someone maybe who's older, maybe someone who you really looked up to, tell absolutely terrifying stories that chill you to the bone and give you nightmares, you need to read Never Whistle at Night. This is an anthology, and it's a bunch of short horror stories by Indigenous authors. And you know, I always have a hard time kind of talking about and reviewing anthologies because, you know, it's across the board. There are some stories that are amazing and usually some stories that are not so amazing. But this compilation was undeniably awesome. One thing I was a little confused about had to do with the editing. I wasn't really sure who decided the order of the stories because there were so many interesting stories, but some were put in a row that were very, very similar and they kind of blurred and bled into each other. And I wish I could have switched that up so all of these stories were highlighted more individually, but that's honestly a minor complaint. Anyway, some of these stories were crazy monster horror, and some were more folkloric, and some were like, this is the real world and it is terrible, and some were even kind of positive, kind of hopeful. I think one of the reasons why I had such a fun time with this one was because I got to add so many new authors to my TBR, and unfortunately not all of them have published any books of their own yet, so we'll just have to wait and see. But it was also nice to see stories in here by authors that I already knew and I already loved. This is so perfect for summer-ween vibes. Barda is a graphic novel set in the DC universe, which admittedly I don't know a lot about. I'm not super plugged into that lore, but I had a great time. I didn't have any trouble following along. I'm trying to get more into graphic novels, and this one was gifted to me, which is why I ended up picking it up. It was honestly relatively straightforward. I don't know, I was maybe hoping for something a little more interesting. But we're following Big Barda, who has been raised or really tortured into loving this oppressive society. She's a warrior for them, and she follows all of their orders without question, and there is no love here. Love does not exist. Except maybe it does for her. So she's starting to have these feelings, and she's starting to question her society for the first time, and she's thinking about moving against them. I thought the artwork was really great here. It popped. I was engaged. I thought the side characters, like the Furies, who were the fellow warriors, were all really, really interesting. And we got like teases of their backstories, but we didn't really get into them, which was such a bummer because I was super curious. This was a really short read. I don't actually know the like average for a graphic novel because I haven't read a ton of them, but this was under 200 pages. So I honestly think it could have been significantly longer, and we could have stretched out Barda's arc more, and we could have gotten more into the Fury backstories. But I would recommend this, and I'll probably end up donating my copy or trying to make sure it ends up in a classroom because I think this is a great story for young readers. And last but far from least, I did do a reread of Dear Senthuran by Akwaeke Emezi this month. I decided to reread this because I signed up for the very first time for an in-person queer book club, and this was their pick. I haven't been to a book club since I was a kid, and I went to my library's book club, so I figured, why not, right? It's a book I love, it's an author I love, I want to reread it anyway, and I'm really into having a conversation about it. And I've read all of Akwaeke Emezi's books, of course. I don't remember where I read this, like in the order the first time that I read them all, but I know that I read it after I had read Freshwater because it kind of gave Freshwater a lot of clarity. But rereading this again now, especially after I had gone to one of their events and I had heard them speak in person for the first time and gotten to know a little more about them, it just hits so much harder. The prose is excellent, obviously. The content is all over the place. It's really interesting. It's an epistolary style book, which maybe you guessed from the title, but these letters aren't linear. We're hopping back and forth and all over the place. It gives you a lot of insight into their life and this kind of major breaking point for their career and their mental health and kind of their desire to live. It's very spiritual as well. The subtitle is a Black spirit memoir, and that definitely rings true. Even if you're not a spiritual person or you just don't have a lot of experience in that arena, I think you'll find this book really relatable. And part of the reason the book club chose this book for July is because July is Disability Pride Month. So there's a chapter where they get really into their chronic pain, and there's a lot in here about mental health too. But the chronic pain chapter in particular was deeply, deeply relatable. It's also a lot about want and desire and the sacrifices you have to make for power and what it means to kind of be giving things up as you search for influence as a marginalized person. I mean, especially as a Black person in America. I highlighted it and I tabbed it so much, and so many of these quotes just hit me right in the chest, and I got really emotional reading it, which honestly doesn't happen a lot for me. I do think it's kind of nice to read this after Freshwater. If you're like, I haven't read any of their books, should I pick up this one first? I do think it's nice to kind of read Freshwater first and then have this to put Freshwater into context. But obviously, you should read all of Akwaeke Emezi's books, and you can read them in any order you want, and I strongly recommend this. Okay, those were my July books, and I'm crossing my fingers that August is going to be an even stronger reading month for me because I'm starting it off with a readathon. For the first time ever, I'm hosting a readathon in my Discord. So everyone's gathering and we're all gonna have fun and hold each other accountable in like a cool, fun way. And maybe some people will go for it and read through the night Saturday into Sunday, or they'll sleep like me because I desperately need sleep to function. But either way, people will just read as much as they can on Saturday and Sunday, even if they can only pop in for an hour. I can't wait to update you all on what I get through and what everyone else gets through and just how the readathon goes. If you're seeing this on the day I'm posting it or while the readathon is happening, this is August 3rd and August 4th, Saturday and Sunday, you should join us. Just hop in, it doesn't matter how long you can actually join for. And if I'm speaking to you way in the future, you should still join my Discord and tell me that you're interested, because I would love to make these a more regular thing, maybe once a month or once every other month. My Discord is part of my bindery, which is kind of like a bookish Patreon, and it is free to join. You can join my free tier and you can sync it up and get access to special Discord channels. And it is such a fun community. Speaking of bindery, I got a slipcase with the first 4 bindery titles, which are being released this fall. I'm so excited to read and review them. And I'm also really hoping to have the chance to start a publishing imprint myself one day. So if you like my content, if you like the sort of books I read and recommend, come support me. We could have the chance to publish a book together from start to finish. So if you're into that, it would mean the world to me if you joined my bindery page, which is called Celestial. Yeah, we're all galaxy themed here. Joining for free honestly helps me a ton, but if you're able to support me with just $5 a month, that means so much more to me than you could ever know. Truly just $5 a month, and you'll get exclusive content and all sorts of other things that I hope to implement in the future. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot to talk about theater that I saw this month. I did see Gatsby at ART. My brain is unfortunately deceased at this point because I've been talking for so long and I don't think I could eloquently talk about my experience with Gatsby. But I did enjoy it and I'm really excited to see how it continues to shift. I hope that it ends up transferring to Broadway, and if so, I would love to go back and see it. But yeah, that was July. Thank you all so much for watching and I hope to catch you next time.